Recognizes Ranking Member Raskin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The district's police force is 5 times larger per capita than the police force in Bakersfield, California, a city with one of the highest crime rates in the United States and the home, of course, of our Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. The D.C. police force is 3 times larger per capita than the force in New Orleans, which is one of the highest crime rates in the United States and is at least partly represented by Majority Leader Steve Scalise. Councilmember Allen, I was interested by your testimony where you pointed out that the lack of statehood for Washington means that the people are unable to control large parts of the criminal justice machinery. People in D.C. are not allowed to elect their own judges. People in D.C. are not allowed to elect, for the most part, the prosecutors who are prosecuting the most serious crimes. You're saying there's a lack of transparency and accountability in federal prosecutions for crimes committed in the district. Say a word, if you would, about how statehood would change that and make the people of Washington far more effective in their ability to address crime, since obviously nobody's more concerned about crime in Washington than Washingtonians themselves.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, sir. I think it's both on the front end and on the back end. I think most people probably saw the Washington Post story today, which has been talked about for quite some time, with the 67% declination rate of moving forward with prosecutions following an MPD arrest by the federal U.S. Attorney's Office. I've been talking about this issue for the last couple of years, where upwards of 60% of MPD's gun arrests don't move forward to a prosecution. We have no ability to hold the U.S. Attorney accountable. When we've even invited the U.S. Attorney into hearings to talk about public safety, they decline to come. So on the front end of that, we see a concern with the U.S. Attorney's Office that we have no accountability and no oversight. On the back end, when we look at individuals that are coming home following a conviction, we have a Federal Bureau of Prisons that leaves people entirely disconnected. And when someone does come home, there's no communication or coordination with the District of Columbia. I appreciate Congressman Norton, who introduced legislation just this week to require the Bureau of Prisons to coordinate and communicate to the District of Columbia. We are unable to be able to have that type of coordination and communication, and most often that individual then moves into another federal agency for supervision, again, not accountable to the District of Columbia. Statehood would change that.
Thank you. Chairman Mendelson, you similarly point out that the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is in charge of prosecuting the most serious offenses that take place in the District of Columbia, is overwhelmed. One reason they're overwhelmed is because there are more than 1,000 cases coming out of January 6th, and they're warning that there could be another 1,000 arrests coming for people who assaulted federal officers, brought dangerous weapons into the Capitol, engaged in seditious conspiracy, and so on. You're calling for adequate resourcing of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Tell us what that means to Washington, D.C. to get federal funding into this office.
Let me start by echoing what Councilmember Allen said, which is that because these are federal agencies, the district government doesn't have the appropriate control to make these agencies more responsive or to have a better criminal justice system. So all of our felonies and most of our misdemeanors are prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney. And what we see over and over again is that they have to prioritize cases. They'll take the more violent cases. They will not prosecute the misdemeanors or the less serious felonies, or they will plea bargain to lesser sentences, which then has consequences if that person gets rearrested because that person isn't considered a dangerous offender. I would note, I think it's horrible what happened to Senator Paul's staff person, who was sentenced by a judge that was appointed by the President of the United States, who was released without notice to the district government by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and who was supposed to go into custody or supervision by CSOSA, which is also a federal agency. This is something that was horrible, and yet it's something of which we have no part because of the way our criminal justice system is structured. But in short, if the U.S. Attorney is going to be prosecuting our cases, they need more resources so that they can prosecute more cases.
And that reminds me that if you read the Declaration of Independence, one of the things that Jefferson was calling for was control in America over judges and prosecutors, saying that the king had no real interest in public safety locally. And you seem to be saying the same thing. If there are problems there, let the district control its own judges, its own
Yes.
prosecutors. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your patience. I yield back to you.